Thank you. It's good to be with you today. It's a pleasure to meet some of you I know well, and others I'm meeting for the first time. So those who I don't know, it's nice to meet you all, and hopefully we can say something that's useful. The one thing I will say is I realize that the GOPB is out of date because we changed it to the Office of Management and Budget in this last legislative session. So we retained the planning function, but we lost the P in the name. So for what that's worth, it's now GOMB. But what I want to talk a little bit about is, you just heard Wolf, and Wolf is the recognized expert in the state on LUDMA, on your land use regulation side. I want to talk a little bit about planning, about why we plan, what's the point of planning. So I'm going to show you some interesting slides quickly, and then some tools that you can use to help you do some planning. So we'll start with a quote from Scripture, and if any of you are offended, I'm sorry. You know, some people. But this is the Old Testament. Where there is no vision, the people perish. So you folks need to have a vision for what you want your community to be. All of us do, but you who are in the position of doing planning, you need to have vision. So this is an interesting picture. That's Main Street, Salt Lake City, 1955. This is City Creek Center. It goes to show you that change is one of those things that's fairly inevitable. And we need to be thinking about it, those of us who are in the position of thinking about and working on planning for the future, be thinking about the fact that we're not always going to be 1955 Salt Lake City. We might end up being City Creek Center. Okay, now I want to show you why planning is important. So I'm just going to go through these slides quickly. This is, by the way, some work that Utah State University did where they took satellite and aerial photography of the whole state, and they were done about 10 years apart. And so they looked at, the first slide is always about mid-1990, say 1996, and then we'll see what happened 10 years later. So you've all heard of Harriman, right? It's supposed to be a fast-growing area. That could be anywhere in rural Utah, right? It's a little town with a whole bunch of farm fields around it. 10 years later, whoops, went just a bit too far. Oh no, that's right. Okay, here we go. 10 years later, there's Harriman, 10 years later. Okay? So, in 10 years' time, we went from a little farming community in the south end of Salt Lake County to this. Eagle Mountain. You've all heard of Eagle Mountain, right? That's mid-1990s, Eagle Mountain. You can see one or two houses in that picture. This is 2006. Okay? So these changes can happen quickly. This is only a 10-year period we're talking about. This is the northeast part of St. George. With some folks from Washington County, this is what, in 1996. That's what that looked like a few years later, 10 years later. This is Perry, Box Elder County. You can see all the trees and all the places. Guess what's left of the trees? They named the streets after them. So you can see the change in 10 years in these areas. Orangeville. Now there's one that didn't change much, right? So Emory County didn't have much growth in that 10-year period. But I wanted to show you that not everywhere in the state of Utah is necessarily growing at those high rates. But that's just an interesting change, because the areas we saw before were changing quickly. So, what is your role? Provide the vision. How do you do that? You have to do that by engaging the citizens in your county. You can't just go and provide the vision yourself. You have to engage your citizens. What do they want? What's important to them? And we're going to talk, after we finish with this short presentation, a little bit about some tools that you can use to help kind of create a vision for your community, and help people understand what they really want to protect. Because change is going to come one way or the other. And so we need to figure out what it is you want to protect during that period of time. Decide what you want your community to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Create a plan to help you achieve that vision. So when we talk about the land use regulations, what's the point of the land use regulation? It's to create the vision, right? So the plan is what provides the reason for the land use ordinance. And the land use ordinance therefore needs to kind of be in compliance with the plan. It needs to be pushing you towards creating the plan. Otherwise, you've wasted your time on the plan. This is something that I think it's important for everybody to remember. This may be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. Landowners and developers are your friends and your constituents. They are the ones who make your vision a reality. They invest the money and build according to what you tell them they can do. So you need to involve them in the creation of a plan when you're doing your planning. Remember that when you write your ordinances, don't make it harder than it needs to be for them to build your vision. Regulate only the necessities, not necessarily to regulate the color of somebody's house all the time. It may be one of the things you want to do, and you know that happens in certain places. But that's also what causes trouble for the indemnity pool. So when somebody starts suing over land use regulations, it's when the regulation is regulating more than is necessary. Be flexible, insist on quality, but let them interpret your vision to fit the market realities. But don't create a situation where you're forcing them to do something they can't sell. Finally, Alice in Planning Land. This is one of my favorite quotes from Alice in Wonderland. And this is sort of a reason for planning. So it says, "Cheshire Puss, would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here?" said Alice. "That depends a good deal on where you want to go," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you go," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice explained. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat, "if you only walk long enough." The truth is the same. If you don't decide where you want to go or where you want to get to, you will get somewhere. And so the question is, where are you going to get? Here's some contact information for me if you have a reason to contact me. I'd be happy to chat with you about any of the things we're talking about today, and I'll give you just a minute to write that down, and then I'm going to change this over quickly to the internet. I'm going to talk to you about some tools that are available through the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and the Quality Growth Commission that you can use to do your planning. Those who, let me know when you're ready and we'll switch that over. Ready to move? Okay. So, let me go down here and okay, so this is called the Super Tool. Stands for State of Utah Planning and Education Resource Toolkit. And it is at planning.utah.gov/super. The Utah Quality Growth Commission, of which I'm the executive director, and some of you know Reed Erickson in the back is a member of our commission, and so you can always talk to Reed if you're more comfortable talking to Reed than to me. But one of the responsibilities of the commission is to provide technical assistance for quality growth planning to local governments. And one of the ways that we've been able to do that is with this. So a couple of things. Let me show you what's in this toolkit. This is a planner education section. So as you're talking about educating your planning commissions and others, some of this might be useful. There used to be, some of you will remember this, there used to be a couple of old men named Gene and Gene who used to do a planning education show. Gene Carr and Gene Moser. And our office and the commission helped write their training manuals. So all of those are available here. And there's also a variety of other training manuals that are here on the way on that. This is some films that were done for that. I can show you some of those if you'd like. Just quickly show you what's here. So you've got some films about the general plan. These are actually done in the 1980s, and they're quite comical to watch, but they're good general understanding of what a general plan is and those sorts of things. So I'll just give you that as that's one section of what's available in the super tool. Second one is, this one is you're writing your land use ordinances. We've gone around the state, create a library of land use ordinances. And you can browse alphabetically, so you can see here by the alphabet. Like if you wanted to do accessory and temporary housing, click on that, and it'll bring up a variety of ordinances from various counties. Now these are mostly counties here. You'll see Juab, Grand, Carbon, variety of different ordinances that they've done, and you can look at that, and then you could copy those and use the pieces that make some sense in your community. You can also search this by subject. So, one's too far. Here we go. So if you want to browse by category, now you can look at critical lands, recreation, open space. You could look at infrastructure and transportation. You can look at land uses, districts and zones, landscaping, lighting, construction methods and design. So you could do, and we can just look quickly at that, it gets you to the same kind of thing. Then there's a variety of topics under that. Plan developments, just as an example. And then up comes a whole bunch of county and city ordinances that have been prepared for by various places, and we have PDF copies of those that you can use, take, and then rework to fit in your own community. So as a resource for looking at what others have done to address an issue that you might be facing, we hope that the Land Use Ordinance Library might be useful to you. If you are aware of land use ordinances that are not included in here that you think might be useful for others, please contact me because we can add them in there. What we're trying to do is, we've done it by PDF so that anyone can read it, but we'd like that to be, we try to update this periodically. We'd like to know what we ought to add. So if you know something that ought to be added, please let me know. Then there's some mapping resources here that help you do mapping of your plans and your ordinances. The first one at the top here is mapserve.utah.gov/planning. This is from the Automated Geographic Reference Center in the state. They have all the geographic information that the state collects in one place on their site. And they created this planning site which has a bunch of layers of GIS data that might be useful for you as counties. And it's in a format where you can access it on the internet. You don't necessarily need to have a GIS person do it. You just go in, I don't know how quick this internet is, but we can try it. But you go in and select on the left-hand side of the screen. This shows you a variety of kinds of things that you can put in there. You can actually, to start with, you can actually have the map take you to your home if you want to. You can type in your address. You can find cities, find a county. You can also go over here to layers, and it'll show you what some of the geographic layers are. So you can look for a variety of different kinds of things to have it show you on a map of your community or part of your county. You can see there's airports, cemeteries, conservation easements, avalanche paths, dam failure paths, dominant vegetation, fault lines, floodplains, habitats for mule deer. You can see all those things. There's a variety of others going on down. So you can put together a fairly significant map with a lot of information there on MapServe. So that would be one place you could go if you need some mapping resources. There's also this tool down here, which is a critical lands planning toolkit, This is one that our office created, and it allows you to buffer critical pieces of land. So if you, for example, have a stream or river, and you want to create a buffer for development around that, you can use some of those kinds of things. And I won't go through that specifically unless you want me to go through them, but just the kinds of tools that are available on the website. A couple I want to get to, so I'd like to go through some of these quickly and then get to some of the more that are related more directly to planning and rather than some of these. But you can see Virtual Utah is the Utah State, and that's where those pictures that I showed you in the presentation, the Harriman and all of those, that's where they came from, is Virtual Utah. And that map, that actually has the entire state. So you could go to any part of your county that you wanted to show if you're having growth in your county, and you could go through and do a similar presentation where you could say, this is what we were like in '96, and this is what we were like 10 years later. You can create that kind of a map on Virtual Utah. And then there are a variety of other mapping-related resources on that part of the super tool. State resources is here. This is, the state doesn't really do land use planning except in certain areas where we have some jurisdiction. So for example, we have links on one side, links to the associations of government, the state agency lists. We have over here what are called state land use plans. These might be of interest to you. These are going to be like the state water plan, forest water quality guidelines, comprehensive wildlife conservation plan. So places where the state has an interest or has some, and we've done some plans, some state transportation plan, community fire planning, outdoor recreation plans, and then where they were available online at the time this was put together, we created links to your county plans. So that's, if any of that's available, of interest to you. This here might be of interest to you, the 2008 baseline. When Envision Utah originally did the quality growth strategy for the 10-county region around Salt Lake City in 2007, or I mean in 1997, the idea was to update that baseline every 5 years. So this is the most recent update. Now, the Quality Growth Commission and Envision Utah are working together to create a new vision this year. This would be the next update year, 2013, but we're going to actually have a new vision and kind of move forward at the end of this year. So, but the 2008 baseline, particularly in the land use section, has some very interesting pieces in it. And this is the extended land use section, but what it has in it is, say for example, by county, you can look at the amount of land that's in agricultural use, you can look at the amount of land that's projected to be taken out of agricultural use for development, a variety of things like that, if we can get this to come up. Sometimes wireless is not as fast as you'd like it to be. Well, oh, there we go, okay. So, if I come over here and scroll down here, let me show you some of the tables that are in here. Taking a long time, it's not doing every page, it's doing one page at a time. Anyway, I'd encourage you to go through that if you've got a higher speed internet or if you've got some time to sit at your desk and have this calculating. All right, so here's one, for example. This is that shows you the amount of developed land versus the amount of agricultural land by county. So Weaver County there at the top, developed land is blue, agricultural land is red. And it's interesting to look where there are significant amounts of agricultural land remaining. This was in 2008. Then the next page after it is an assessment of a projection based on what we understand your current plans to be. How will that change by 2040? So that's the next. And there's actually a page in here for each county. This is one by. So then this shows the changes. You can see Utah County loses quite a bit of land over time. Uinta County basically remains the same. Willow loses quite a bit. Salt Lake basically has nothing left in 20 years. Millard, etc. That's the kind of thing that's in this baseline report. You might find that useful as you go about doing your planning to look at what the current situation is and what some of the, or was 2008, and what some of the ongoing issues are going to be going forward. And then over on this side again, there's a number of, we have the land use law for the municipalities, the land use law for the counties. So if you want to know how to find that, you can also find that easily on the legislature's website. This just takes you there directly from the super tool. The state public notice website, and then planner's legislative review from the Utah APA, and that's updated every year after the legislative session. So a few things you can do. Now if we go back, and those of you who live in public lands counties, some of these might be very useful to you. Critical and public lands planning resources. Most of you, I think, are going to be in public lands counties, since there aren't very many counties in Utah that aren't the majority of public land. So again, more videos up at the top, critical lands planning training videos. There's a new Utah Living with Fire video. Again, that critical lands encyclopedia and mapping toolkit we talked a little bit about. But the one I most wanted to show you is down here a little ways. Let's see. What happened to our critical lands planning toolkit? Here it is. Okay, so this is our. So we created a toolkit to help counties do the county resource management plan. So if you want to do a county resource management plan, what we've discovered is that if you want the feds to pay attention to your county plans, you need to write them in the style of the feds. And they will talk about, here's this piece of land, what's its current condition, what's its desired future condition. So this toolkit can help you go through and kind of think about areas in your county that you would like to write into your plan and kind of talk about it in each of those, in that kind of language, so that they can't ignore it. One of the problems that the federal government has talked to us about is that they have sometimes ignored county plans because they have indicated that they were really policy statements and not plans. There was nothing for them to do other than understand that you didn't like what they were doing, right? This is an attempt to sort of say, okay, let's do a little more than say we don't like what you're doing. Let's say, what would we do in this case, and what do we think is important to do in this case? So that's kind of what the purpose of this is to write a plan that looks kind of like a federal plan, and that they then have to pay more attention to, because it's not just a statement of what we don't like, but it's a statement of what we actually like. So that's one of the things that's in the public lands planning area that might be useful to you, is in those public lands counties. And one more area, and then we can talk a little bit more if you've got questions or whatever. But so design resources, and the first thing in the design resources is what we call a rural character toolkit. One of the things that I hear from people in rural areas, or areas that are transitioning all the time, is I ask them, well, what do you want your county to look like, or your city to look like? And they say, well, I don't know, we want to preserve our rural character as we grow. So then I say, what do you mean by rural character? And it's like the Supreme Court and their definition of pornography, which is, I don't know, but I'll know when I see it. And this essentially is kind of is an effort to help a community define spatially what they want to preserve, what they mean by rural character. So for example, if you live in Cache County and you drive down Highway 89 going to Logan and you see that barn that has the painting on the side of it, you can identify that is something we want to preserve. We like that as one of the things. You put that on a map. And this is a paper toolkit, so you don't do this online. You print out the assessment forms and you let people go through in a variety of areas and identify, kind of creating the vision. What is it you want to preserve in your rural area to preserve your rural character? Now, the interesting part about this is we've looked at it. We've been tempted to change this from rural character toolkit to community character toolkit because what we discovered is that you can really identify anything, whether it's rural or not, something that defines the character of your community using the assessments that are in this toolkit. So the idea is to help people or allow people to have the opportunity to think about what is important to them and to define spatially on a map, some other way, what some of their really key pieces of, it says final draft, it's as final as it's going to get, so don't worry about it being just a final draft. So, so there's a variety of definitions and then analysis and checklists. So start with the table of contents. Rural character defined. So the first thing you want to do is define and better understand the meaning of rural character, and then analyze the elements of rural character, identify, inventory, and map those rural characteristics, and access basic information necessary to inform strategies and planning to allow for local submissions that can maintain the desired character. So here are some of the definitions of rural character. Rural character is designed by unique characteristics of a place and its inhabitants. Rural character includes both the physical and social environment. The physical environment includes such things as buildings, places, organizations and layouts, landscapes, etc. The social environment may include shared traditions, lifestyles, activities, events, employment, etc. And there are some links there to places in other states where they've tried to define rural. One of the problems we have in Utah, and I think everywhere, is everyone has a different definition of what is rural. So, for example, Box Elder County doesn't meet the definitions of rural under some federal programs. But I'm sure if you got out of the western Box Elder County, you'd feel like you were in a rural area. Same with Tooele County. Some parts of western Tooele County feel awfully rural. Washington County has some areas that are relatively rural, but also some areas that are quite urban. And that's the case with lots of places. So how do you define rural? What we're trying to do then is to create a checklist where you can define what these characteristics are that you think you want to say. Coming back to that notion of, as you're doing your planning, you want to plan for the future. And part of that is, what do I want my community to feel like? What do I like and what do I want to keep as I change? Because growth is coming. A couple of things you ought to know about Utah. We're one of the fastest growing states in the nation, one of the youngest states in the nation. And 2/3 of all the growth in Utah is internally generated. It's our children and our grandchildren. 1/3 is in migration. So even if we didn't have anybody move in, we still have significant amounts of growth going forward. Unless we change our habits and start having fewer children. Which I suppose is a possibility, but ultimately I'm not counting on that happening very quickly. So we're looking forward to a lot more Utahns. And that probably means a lot more people in your counties. Your counties are going to be different in 20 years or 30 years than they are now, because the populations are going to be larger. Is that going to be the case in every county? Maybe not. But certainly in most counties in Utah, they're going to be larger, you're going to have more people. And so the point of this toolkit is to think now about, what do I like about my county, being in a rural county? And how do I preserve those things as we hit growth? The reason to plan now is because if you don't, you're going to be hit by a wave of growth. My experience with growth is this. Many communities don't have the money or resources to plan, or they don't allocate the resources to plan, until the first wave of growth hits them. So a wave of growth hits them, they don't like what they get, then they do a plan. But by then it's too late, because the second and third and fourth and fifth waves are hitting you, and you end up being regulators, right? All you do is spend your time approving subdivisions, issuing building permits, rather than actually thinking about what we want the county to look like going forward. So I encourage people, everyone I talk to, go out and plan. Here's some tools you can use, but go out and plan. Think about what you want your community to be. Talk to your community and the residents who are there now, and your children and grandchildren. What do you like and what do you want to keep? You might try having people take pictures of what they like in their county and what they don't like about new growth. So you can have a sense for what you want to protect. And then write a plan that tries to protect some of that while allowing for growth. And then make sure that your land use ordinance matches your plan, because that's really the key. Is if the land use ordinance and the plan are not in compliance with each other, it's a waste of time to do a plan or an ordinance. You'll get what's in your ordinance, not what's in your plan. This has also got some other design resources. As you're writing a plan, you can tell some other ways of visualizing what's going on. For those of you who are a little more urbanized or you have lots of bicyclists, the Utah Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan Design Guide might be useful to you. Engineering for planners, prospering places, toolkits. We've tried to identify a variety of things that are out there. Now, one of the interesting ones that might be useful to you is this one, which was produced by the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And this is a visual library, so it shows you what different kinds of growth look like. So if somebody wants to know what does a particular type of growth look like, you can go into their image library and it will show you a variety of different types. Oh, they've apparently changed the link. We'll have to fix that. So we'll see if there are any of these other videos. Some of this stuff is still working. Anyway, that's a very interesting way to look at it and help people understand what you say. We want to do some of these things. There are some pictures here that can help you. Maybe the image library sample would be working. Let's try that. Some of these may not apply in your communities, but they might, and it's interesting to look at them and see what people are talking about when they talk about a particular type of development. Is there any questions or any thoughts or anything I can answer for you while we're waiting for some of this stuff to come up? Or maybe it's not something you're interested in at this point and we can just move on. This is taking us a little while in line to do this. Maybe we'll just move on and come back to it later. So that's the super tool. I just wanted to share this with you. The other thing I wanted you to know a little bit about the Quality Growth Commission, we have two other missions. One is to make recommendations to the legislature regarding quality growth in Utah. And then the second, then the last thing we do is we administer something called the Leroy McAllister Critical Land Conservation Fund, which is a fund that is used to protect certain critical land resources in Utah through the acquisition of conservation easements, and in some cases, actual fee title purchases of land. You're going to hear more about conservation easements tomorrow from Wendy Fisher, and Wendy is kind of the recognized experts on conservation easements, but I just wanted you to know what we're up to. Any questions? I'd encourage you to go look at the super tool and try to enjoy, trying to find some of the value out of that. If there's nothing else, I think that's basically what I wanted to say. So, be happy to chat with you. I didn't go very long. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
One thing I found helpful is the Utah APA chapter.
Yes, they've got good resources there too.
One of the things I've done is whenever we're looking at changing the ordinance or adopting the ordinance, I'll get on their webpage and send an email to their webmaster who sends out all the planning departments throughout the state, and I can get a lot of great comments back. And you don't have to recreate the wheel 100%.
Right. So there are those kinds of opportunities for you, and I would encourage you to do that. If you want to know what other communities do, APA is a good place. We've done some of that in our Ordinance Library, but ours is certainly not comprehensive, and there may be other things that are going on right now that we're unaware of. Talk to each other. Share with each other what your problems and issues are and how you're addressing them, because that's a really good way to deal with it. Let me just say this. I want to encourage everyone to plan, because I've seen a lot of this situation where what we're doing is regulating. And regulation is great, it's necessary, but thinking about and planning and then creating ordinances to implement your plan is what really gets you the kind of community that you want to live in. And it has to be done at the local level, not, I can't impose it from the state level and wouldn't want to. Yes?
Just wondering on the draft ordinances that you pose on your website, is there a way that we could set up some kind of a feedback or comment section where people who are in those jurisdictions can comment on how well those are working? Or, I mean, is that, I noticed a couple of ordinances you have up there from Oregon, which I would very much recommend taking down, and I'll talk to you.
Okay, that's great. We'd like to know that. They're not working well. Well, that's what we want to know. But that's a really good idea, and I will talk, I'll talk with my colleague Evan Curtis about that as well, because he manages a lot of that work. But having a feedback comment and say, you know, this one's worked really well, and you ought to keep it up there as an example. This one's not working at all, you got to get rid of it and not encourage others to even look at it, will be really useful. You can certainly contact me and we'll get that done. And if there's some that we shouldn't have up there, we definitely want to take them down. If they're not working, we don't want people to be implementing them other places. But it would be nice to be able to have a wiki or something. So we'll see if we can figure that out, how to do that. Thanks. Other suggestions? Okay.
And you know, from our standpoint too, when you are doing the regulation without the planning,
That's right.
it makes it almost impossible for us to defend you.
That's right.
So from that perspective, you know, if you like spending time with attorneys in deposition, don't have a plan and go ahead and regulate. If you prefer to have us get those lawsuits thrown out quickly, have a plan and regulate according to the plan.
So thank you for that. I think it's important to understand that's why the indemnity pool wants you to think about planning, because when you write your land use ordinance, if it's not tied to a plan, it looks like it's arbitrary and capricious, and that's very difficult to defend against. The notions of arbitrariness and capriciousness, the courts hate that. But if you can say, look, we said this in our plan, and that's why this is in the ordinance, then there's a tie to it. It's not an arbitrary, you didn't make up that rule because you just didn't like this particular person. You made up that rule because it was part of trying to get what you wanted as a community through your community general plan. So there's a reason for planning more than just because you like thinking about the future. You plan partly to defend yourself, because now you can write an ordinance that says, you know, we as a community have decided what we want to be, and we wrote our ordinance to help us get there, and we're not just out here doing this because it's fun, okay? Or because we want to make mischief. Sometimes it seems to landowners and developers like the whole business of, well, the whole reason why you're in the land use business is to make mischief. And that's really not the case. And the way you make it that clear is that you have an up-to-date general plan that says this is what we want our community to be. We'd like to help if we can. If you've got suggestions, I'd really like to hear from you. If we could, as a commission, could help in coming down and helping with some of your training, we might be willing to do that. Come down and talk to your planning commissioner, your city council, your county commissioner, and county council members. And anything we can do to assist you in encouraging you to do planning, we'd like to do that.
Can I ask a question?
Ask me a question.
You talk about developing the vision with the people in the community.
Right.
And I used to work with the planning commission in the city that was an urban, suburban community in Minneapolis, and now I live in Draper. And they seem to have the same problem, that when the planning commission would get together and ask the community what they wanted, they would get the people that have been there for 30 years, and their vision is, we want to continue to be a farming bedroom community. And that you just, in those types of areas, you can't, it's hard to say that's what you're going to continue to be, because you will not. Any ideas from you or others as far as how do you bring that element into your meeting with the reality that we can't, even though that's the people who show up, we can't plan for that because it's not going to happen?
Well, there are a couple of things that help with that. First is good information. So one of the things that you do when you develop a vision is you need to let people know what they can expect. Growth is going to come. Nothing you can do to push it out. It's going to come. And the question is it going to come in the places and of the type that we want? That's really the question. Am I going to give up all the things I like because I have to approve people's land use proposals because I've never had a general plan and I haven't updated my land use ordinance in 20 years? If you don't update your land use ordinance, you're going to get what you currently get. It's just going to go over everywhere, sprawling out wherever it goes. So,
Draper.
Yeah, like Draper. So what you want is to understand what you want and then write a plan and an ordinance that gets you what you want, because that's how you get there. So one thing is good information. You're going to grow. How many more people are we going to have in 20 years? And our office, let me show you another. If you go on planning.utah.gov, you can find the DEA section. That's not the Drug Enforcement Administration. That's Demographic and Economic Analysis section. They have information about every county and resources to help you in every city identify what the growth patterns are going to be like in your county. But they make projections going ahead 50 years for what the growth in every county is going to be. You can, as a county person, you can say, we know we're going to get this many more people based on the best estimates of the best demographers in Utah. I mean, they have a committee made up of university professors, state economists, and others that make those projections, and they update those projections every year. So you can tell people, we know how many people we're going to have in our community. We're not going to stay the same. We're going to be bigger than we were. We know that. So what do? Where do we put those people when they come? That's part of the information. You need to talk about whatever the constraints are about where you build. Where are the areas that you can't build in? Where are the areas that people want to stay? So I think you begin by soliciting information from people. What is it that you like about the county that you want to say? That's why I talked to you a little bit about this rural character toolkit. Starting with that, and saying, you know, we're thinking about updating our general plan, but we'd just like to know from you, what is it that defines rural character for you in this community? Start with that, and then when you have that map of areas and things and festivals, and this would include, we want to continue to have the Strawberry Festival, even if we don't grow any strawberries, right? Because strawberry festivals strawberries were a big thing to our ancestors, and it ties us together and helps us to remember who we are and where we came from. Those are the kinds of things that can be part of what you want to talk about in that. So start with good information about your community, good information about what's likely to happen in the future. Definitely use alternative ways of contacting people. You look back to 1997 when Envision Utah did their first visioning processes. They used the tried and true, let's have a bunch of meetings and talk to people. When they did the Wasatch Canyon study 2 years ago, they had all this stuff online on a website and a place where you could go and answer all the questions that they were trying to get people to answer at the meetings online. And they had 1,000 people at the meetings. This was 8 or 10 meetings that they generated 1,000 people. But they had 10 to 12,000 people who responded online. So they got the same information, they just responded in a different way. So think about websites, think about wikis, think about Facebook pages, think about Twitter feeds, whatever you need as a way to contact people, and some of the younger people, some of the people who will be living in the county in the future. And then the other thing to think about is who you're planning for, and make that the case to people. You're not planning for the person who's 70. They're not going to be here for another 10 or 15, 20 years. You're planning for your grandkids. You want your grandkids to live in the same community you live in. You've got to make that place, you've got to start now to make that place someplace that they want to live in. And there's a lot of places in the U.S., some in Utah, that have just allowed growth to happen wherever it's going to happen. And they're not as nice a place to live in as some other places that are thought about. So I think it's important to sort of think about who you're planning for and make that case to people. Who are you planning for? Are we planning for those of us who are here now, or are we planning for those of us who are going to be here in the future? So that's, I mean, the visioning is really thinking about the future, but you can't do a plan if you don't have a vision. If you don't know what it is you think you want, then your general plan is not going to be very useful to you, because it will just be a statement of, you know, the current condition and not looking forward. You really need to be looking forward and say, this is where we want to go. But I'd encourage all of those things. I'd encourage you want to have meetings. You're required by law to have meetings. You have to have public hearings. But you don't have to have only public hearings. You can use surveys. You can use, you know, you can have a Survey Monkey survey on your website and encourage people to read that. You can have, you know, you can drive people to the website by going into schools and making presentations and having all the high school kids tell you what they like and don't like. So there's a lot of things like that that you can do, elementary school kids. The people that you're actually planning for, let them have a say in what kind of community they want to have. So just think outside the box in terms of how you want to contact people with regard to trying to get some of this information out, and then give them some options to talk about, and also ways that they can make their own suggestions. The best planning decisions are made by planners who provide a lot of information and then provide some suggestions. Now, right now, there's a tool being created in the Wasatch Front area that will probably be available statewide by the end of the year, called ET Plus, which will have you'll have the capability of doing scenarios planning. Scenarios planning is the idea of looking at, okay, if we did this, this is what we get. If we did this, this is what we get. If we did this, this is what we get. Which of those do you like? So people can comment on which of those possible future conditions they like the best. And they might end up picking parts of all of them, and so you come up with a fourth scenario that's the one you actually promote. So some of that opportunity to do scenarios planning will be available statewide, we hope by the end of the year. It would allow a planner to sit down at his desktop or her desktop enter some basic information about your community, and then some ideas about, density and a few other things, and allow you to identify what some possibilities are. You could identify where growth might be placed, what kinds of areas you would want to protect from development. There are lots of things you should think about. Do you like the mix of economics in your community? If you're mostly in an agricultural area, do you like that? Or do you want to have different kinds of jobs? Different kinds of jobs are going to attract different kinds of people, which can attract different kinds of development. So it's worth thinking about all the way across the board, all those kinds of things. But I hope that's helpful. Yes?
One last, the demographic information section, is that a link from that webpage?
We can go back to that, and I'll show you if somehow this has got disconnected. If we go just to, let's see, go to planning.utah.gov. Let's see here. It's just not going there. Okay, there we go. So see here, DEA. So you can see over here, demographics, population estimates. So they have estimates, state of Utah by county. You can see the estimates that were made from 1920 to 2011. 2011 population estimates by county. Who's on the Utah Population Estimates Committee, and then the Census Bureau estimates. You also can see the projections. So sub-county population projections, employment by area, population and household by area, population by aging area, variety of things like that. So you can get all that information. They haven't done the 2013 projections yet because they're waiting for the 2012 data. But so this is the most up to date. But that's another place where you can go to get data from our office. The Utah Population Estimates Committee does this. They take Census Bureau data, they take the best data from the colleges and universities, and then they make those projections. And if we go back one, I can show you again here, who are the members of UPEC, if you want to know the members of that committee. So Michael Maurer, who's the state planning coordinator, and our chief economist, folks from the various associations of government. So there's a variety of other state agencies, the University of Utah, Office of Education, some businesses that do a lot with that. We've got Westar Gas, Utah State, the State Tax Commission, etc. So there's this committee that makes those population estimates, and those are the most. They do them annually, so they're the most up-to-date estimates that are available because the Census Bureau does theirs, I think, every 5 years or something. So these would be the most up-to-date estimates that you can get on a yearly basis, both current estimates and others. Read.
John, would you talk briefly to how we actually get this planning done, the pros and cons of having a consultant come in and help, having the planning commission involved,
Right.
taking the whole thing and saying we need to do a creative vision and do a plan, sometimes seems just too big to
Right.
take on, and whether, at every planning commission, I dare say across the state that over the last year, there's probably been more planning commissions canceled because they didn't have applications to review.
Right.
So they said, well, let's just cancel the meeting. That's really not, and so how can planning commissions actually do this? Can we take a little piece at a time, or do we really need to have a big plan and turn the whole county upside down and creating a new vision and
Right.
plan? Can you
Thanks,
address
Jim.
that?
I think that the answer to the question is that you should do it a piece at a time. particularly if the planning commission members are the ones who are doing it, they're gonna be overwhelmed if they're trying to do it. If you wanna do a county-wide vision, you're really gonna have to hire a consultant. My guess is many counties will have the money to do that. But there's no reason why you couldn't have different planning regions within your county, and why you couldn't take each piece and say, what do we want to do in this area? How does this area fit with the whole? And what do we want to do? Are we comfortable with what our plan says, or do we think it needs to change? And to be thinking about that. And in fact, I would encourage planning commissions to have their staff put something related to planning on every agenda. So let's talk about this part of the county this month. What are we going to do in that area? What does the current plan say? Do we have a plan for that area? Do we need to take the public lands planning toolkit and start thinking about desired future conditions in some parts of that county? That part of the county, you really have to eat the elephant, like they say, one bite at a time. So I think it's possible to eat this elephant one bite at a time. It's not necessary to eat this elephant all at once. Now, eating the elephant all at once can be a really useful tool. You know, you've got the money and the time as a community to go out and do a community general plan, you know, and look at the whole county. That's a useful exercise. But it isn't necessary to do that in order to accomplish your goal. Some of the counties that you represent are very large, and they're going to be diverse in terms of what their needs are. There are going to be some parts of them where, you know, it's all federal land. And then there will be other parts where there's just a little bit of private land. Your focus is really going to have to be on where the private land is if you live in a public lands county. So you don't have to worry that much about the public lands areas, except you probably ought to think about, okay, a little bit at a time. If I lived in a public lands county and I were on the planning commission, what I wanted every meeting would be, okay, in the areas where we have private land that we regulate as a county, what do we need to be looking at in terms of what does the current general plan say, and then how can we update it to make it more effective going forward? The second thing I'd be doing is saying, what does our public lands plan say? And ought we be looking at our public lands plans and saying, okay, do they really meet our needs in the public lands arena? So that's what I'd be doing. In some of the other counties, Morgan, for example, has a lot of private land in it. They got a lot of private land work to do, and they ought to be, I think, looking at various parts of the county. So every month, your agenda ought to have what are the things, the applications we're going to approve, but also, what are we going to think about for the future? I think every agenda ought to have some planning on it, because you're the planning commission, you're not the project approval commission. If that's all you're going to do, then that's you ought to change your name. Yes.
One of the things that we've been doing a little bit is just having, you know, the planning commission and the staff communicating back and forth. You know, we have, staff's been in Washington County, we've been getting a lot of interest lately in bed and breakfast. Right now, bed and breakfasts really aren't allowed in the county.
Right.
So we had a shorter agenda, and we brought it up to the planning commission and said, this is something that's been coming up a lot. Do we want to be looking at the economic benefits or the change in how people, you know, the people that from outside coming to our county, do we want to look at making changes to this, and then having a discussion on those issues? And so then you're handling these changes on a smaller level, but it's still going along with what the vision is.
Exactly right, and that's a perfect example. You can say, okay, in this agenda, we're going to talk about, we've had this request and we don't have any way to deal with it. So what do we need to do with our plan and then with our ordinance to think about changing that to deal with that request? So that's another way to deal with it. And as you're doing that, think about the value of allowing that to happen. Remember I said, regulate what is essential, don't regulate everything. One of the things I did in 2011 was I was part of the staff and also a member of the Governor's Task Force on Agriculture Sustainability. One of the things that we told people about sustaining agriculture in communities is allowing a lot of flexibility with regard to what you allow people to do on their farms. And you're talking about a bed and breakfast. It may be that there's a farmer that's got a cool old farmhouse that he could rent out some rooms for his bed and breakfast as a way to supplement the income on his farm. That might very well keep him on the land rather than having him sell the land off, and then you having to deal with the questions, do we want to allow a big development, or does he have to go and find a city that will annex him so he can do development, and all those other kinds of questions. So thinking about, do we want to have agricultural areas? If we do, how do we deal with it? I'll give you another example on that subject, something to think about, because this is something that's become kind of important to me. I discovered in Davis County that a farmer can have a fruit stand on his farm to sell his produce, but he can't bring in something that his neighbor grows and sell that on his stand, and he can't let his neighbor sell something he grows. So what that means is that if I grow only corn, or mostly corn, I can sell corn. My neighbor maybe grows watermelons, but I can't sell his watermelons. That means if I've got a customer, the customer's got to stop at 2 or 3 stands. Whereas you could potentially have the farmers get together and say, I'll give you some corn to sell. You give me some watermelons to sell, we'll just return the proceeds to each other and take advantage so that the customers wouldn't have to go to 2 or 3 different places to get all the things that they want. That's a land use issue. It's a question of, are we going to allow you to, partly it's a land use, partly it's a business regulation thing. But so think about, that's the other piece of doing planning. Think about how your land use and your business regulations impact what happens in your community, because your business regulations often prevent you from doing things. Yes.
I think another tool that's really worked well for us is not feel like you have to create everything. We've had a lot of luck having like our Water Conservancy District and others who have done studies and analysis for watershed protection, location of dams, reservoirs, those kinds of things. When they produce a high quality document, we've gone through, taken it through the Planning and Zoning Commission, then adopted that as an appendices into our general plan, because they're the experts in that, we're not. So when you have a group of people doing an analysis like that who are frankly better at it than you are, don't get so prideful that you just don't take advantage of that. We've done it twice with public lands issues. We've got a really thick general plan, but I'll tell you, when BLM is doing their review, we've got specifics right by location of where we're thinking about putting dams, or where we're going to put canals, where we're going to put water lines. My Planning and Zoning Commission is not expert on that, but they've gotten the feedback from those entities that have spent, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars and years studying that.
And that's a really good idea. That's a really good point, is that there's an awful lot of stuff that's being done. One of the things that I've started to do whenever I've been asked to look at a planning effort is to say what's already been done, because there's no reason to recreate the wheel. If you want to, for example, as I talked about agricultural sustainability, you want to understand what you have to do to promote farming in Utah. Get a hold of that, the report for the Agricultural Sustainability Task Force. Start with that. Don't go out and interview all your farmers to start with. You probably want to do that, but you can go to them with a lot of information that you already have gleaned. And there's a lot of that kind of information that's out there. And so again, if you're looking at what you do in your in your planning commission meetings, that's a great idea. Have them come in and say, look, we've done this study, and have them present the study to the planning commission. And so the planning commissioners now are getting educated on issues that are going to be related to planning in the future. And they can say, we like this study, we think it's clearly well done, we will adopt it, or we will take a copy of it and use those pieces of it that make sense as we're doing our planning going down the road.
And we were kind of unique to get an agritourism
Yeah,
ordinance,
good.
which has been, we've had 4 or 5 applications now of bed and breakfast, somebody doing wedding reception in a barn, whatever, maybe.
And that's what I'm talking about, is don't regulate where you don't need to regulate. Let the farmer do what he needs to do to stay on the land, because the truth is, we can't pay enough people to make a difference. We can't buy enough development rights to make a difference in agricultural preservation. The only way we do it is we make farmers profitable. And so if that's important in your county, you need to be thinking about, do we have barriers to profitability in our ordinances? And if we do, maybe we need to have a plan for that and then kind of address those barriers. And that is, interestingly enough, we're almost done, but that is something to look at in the ordinances. What are the barriers to getting what we think we want? What does our ordinance do in terms of allowing somebody who owns land and wants to develop it to do the things we say we want them to do? You'd be surprised how many times I talk to developers who say, I go to that city and they say, or that county, and they say, we want this, but then if I propose it, they can't do it, right? They can't do what they say they want. And they can't do it because their stuff is a conditional use versus a permitted use, because the conditions are always unreasonable, etc. So if you say you want something, let people do it. Just give them, make it a permitted use and let them do it and see what happens. That would be my recommendation in that area. Anything else? Please.
Basic question. If our small municipalities decide not to do a general plan, are they protected in any way other than by state law? Does the county general plan help them?
State law says every city and county is supposed to have a general plan. So if they don't do a general plan, this is he's lucky that he doesn't represent them. But potentially, they could be sued. And in fact, there was a period of time when municipalities and counties were being sued on a regular basis because they hadn't done the required moderate income housing plans. And that's still probably happening in many places where the moderate income housing plans are out of date. Somebody comes in and wants to build what they can claim is quote unquote moderate income housing, and you don't have an up-to-date plan, you can be sued. So it's important. That's the other thing, is figure out what state law requires. Right now there are 4 required elements in every general plan. Do you know what they are? Okay, let's see if I get them right. One's a moderate income housing plan. One is a land use ordinance or land use plan. One of them is a capital facilities plan. What's the 4th one? Transportation plan, that's right. Everything else, and then there's a whole long list of other things you can put in there. You have to have at least those 4 elements, and everybody has to have a general plan. So if they're not doing a general plan, they're out of compliance with state law, and they're subject potentially to being sued by somebody who wants to do something in their community. And people who want to do something in their community that they don't want them to do will inevitably look for the places they're out of compliance. That's just what will happen. So you ought to tell your communities that they need to have a general plan, even if all they have are those 4 required elements. So, read.
You know, and one thing I think that helps with the communities, sometimes there is a dynamic between the counties and the cities and towns in terms of planning and where we overlap. And I think a good way to help with that is to sit down with those cities and work on their annexation expansion areas or their growth areas that they're required to do that affect the counties. You know, and say, well, do you plan on annexing this area? Is this an area? So that the counties are aware of that, and then coordinate when development comes. So, for instance, in our county, we have a requirement that a developer that's within an annexation expansion area of a city has to go to that city and talk about annexation. Does it qualify? Can they provide the services before the county would accept an application for development in that fringe area?
Right.
Then we try to coordinate with the cities, and I think that that's part of the county's role in planning, is coordinating where that growth will occur, and that the cities are anticipating that as well, or the county understands that no, the city does not plan to expand in that area.
Right. He's brought up another thing. That's something that cities are supposed to have, not necessarily part of the general plan, but they're supposed to have an annexation policy plan. So they're supposed to identify the areas where they would annex and they would agree to annexation surrounding them. That, of course, affects you as counties directly, because what they're talking about is taking land that you currently control and annexing it into the city so that they would then be in control of it. Most counties in Utah like that. Most counties don't want to be in the land use business. That is, they don't want large-scale development in the county. The 2 big outliers, of course, are Salt Lake County and Summit. Salt Lake County has more people that they provide municipal services to than Salt Lake City does. 170,000 people roughly that get their municipal services from Salt Lake County. So Salt Lake County is is an outlier in that, but most other counties want the cities to provide those municipal type services. If that's the way your county is, then working with your local cities and saying, look, we don't want to do that, well, that's your job. Let's help you create an annexation policy plan so you understand where you're getting annexed, and we can, when people come to us in those areas, we can say, you need to go talk to the city, and you need to start those annexations so that they're occurring. That's going to be a really important piece of what you have to do. Counties do have some differences in terms of what they're supposed to do with regard to cities, because in most places, the cities are providing the municipal services and the counties are not. And so when you approve developments in the county, you're approving a different kind of development. You're approving a rural development, somebody that's providing a lot of services to themselves, not somebody that's expecting to get municipal type services within your counties. That's typically what's happening now. As I say, there are some outliers, but that's typically what's happening. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if it is, but the short answer to your question is there's no reason why you couldn't work with them, but they don't have any cover from your plan unless remember there's always the chance for an interlocal agreement. So if they said, we want you to plan for us, they could by interlocal agreement allow you to do their planning for it. But if that doesn't happen, they're not covered by your plan unless they choose to do that.
How many of your counties do you think there are municipalities out there that don't have a plan in place? I think every community in your...
How many have municipalities that haven't updated their plans in the last 10 years? My guess is most of them.
So, as a proponent of enterprise risk management, where you look at risk, because that's a risk for you. Any city that doesn't have a plan, that could end up in a lawsuit, where now all of their time and energy is being spent on defending that lawsuit, and not working on other things that help build the county. Any county or any city certainly that has a plan that's counter to your overall general county plan is a risk to you. So, for those of you who have those communities out there that don't have one, or have one that's outdated, or have one that's counterproductive to the overall county plan, work with, see it as enterprise risk management, where you look at those risks and try and find an opportunity in it. They need help. They'll welcome you in to help them get their plans going and get them compliant if they don't have one at all, or get in line with what the overall plan for the county is, and use that to your advantage. And help them move forward, because the better their planning is, the more their cities grow, the more the county grows. And certainly that needs to be a part of their plans within those communities. I talked about the community I lived in Minnesota a while back, and because their plan was continually to continue to be a farm community, bedroom community, people had their cabins there and things like that. We were the third from the bottom on the list of business tax revenue in the state. And here we are 20 miles from Minneapolis on a major highway corridor. It was poor planning, because we didn't have enough money to put police on the streets and do things. And the county was frantic with us that we weren't opening up that corridor and putting in businesses that they could have county tax from, and hotels and conference centers and things. So you have an opportunity now, if they're behind on their planning, to get in there and help them with it.
They should know how you feel about it. They should know that where they're planning, what their responsibilities are, and what you see your responsibilities are, and how they differ. They shouldn't assume that you've done something that's going to cover them. They need to understand that that's their decision. They've got local government's trust that's going to worry about whether or not they're getting sued. But you might have some issues with regard to how you can, what happens coming back on you. Because, for example, if they don't have sufficient policing, you could wind up, as your county sheriff is required to provide that service if they're not providing it. So you could wind up, they could just not have a police force and wind up having to cover those costs. So you do have some of those things that are potentially out there. Some reason why you need to talk to those people. You ought to be talking to each other anyway, because good planning always requires talking to it. And one more thing I will say, If you don't do good planning, it's gonna wind up at the legislature and everybody's gonna get punished for it. And you as counties got punished in the last legislative session because of the actions of one county. So you now have a limitation on some of the kinds of ordinances that you can write. You're gonna have to do some workarounds because of one county. So just understand that if you don't do it right, if one county doesn't do it right, you can all wind up paying for it. And I'm sure we'll talk to you about that, but for example, you now have to figure out how you're going to get people to abide by a site plan without enforcing your site plan. Okay? Salt Lake County came up with a workaround that might work for that, which is to attach your site plan to your building permit, so it becomes part of your building permit instead of a separate document. Because, and so that may work. You also can't enforce, as part of your land use ordinance, a landscaping ordinance. You've got to figure out a workaround, and that may end up meaning that your weed boards get more power. Because that may be that they're the ones who have to require people to put something on their property other than bare dirt. Okay? So just be aware that when you don't plan or when your people don't act professionally, you cause problems for everybody else. And now you as counties, that's not, none of these things apply to the cities, but as counties, you're facing those problems because of the actions of one county and one particularly powerful legislator. So that's the problem, is that it winds up at the state, winds up in the state legislature, and it winds up causing all kinds of trouble if we don't do this. So planning is really important. I know it's hard to do, and a lot of times we don't think about it when we're busy. But if we don't have it in place, we're asking for trouble. And just one other thing on the same note. Please train your people to look for solutions rather than to just regulate. Because that's what causes us to end up at the legislature and all of us to suffer, is when people say, no, we can't, there's no way you can do that, instead of saying, well, maybe if we tried it this way, we could get around the problem. If you want to know specifically what caused those problems, I can tell you, but the biggest issue was county staff, first of all, having a very rigid county plan that didn't provide an obvious solution, and then secondly, county staff not looking for solutions, just saying we're going to enforce them. We're going to regulate rather than try to find a solution. So try to find a solution rather than just regulate. That would be my other argument. And I'm sure that would help your friend over here as well. You're welcome. Thank you.
Who in the room in the last hour found out about some resources that they didn't know about when they came here today? Thank you, John. Thank you so much.